British guy.
Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, new report says that MCPS has failed to prepare students in career readiness. Did he or didn't he agree to work with Dems to legalize Dreamers? Only the Trumpster knows for sure. And with apologies to George Gershwin, summertime and the country was uneasy. What path will the nation take after the violent clashes in Charlottesville? Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by consultant and business strategist Rich Parsons, Republican activist Phil Bell, former congressional candidate Liz Matory, and past president of Progressive Maryland, Elbridge James. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. As many on the political left refuse to accept the legitimacy of the Trump election, the nation has seen an increase in violent protests since November. For progressives, Donald Trump is not just another Republican president. 76% of Democrats, according to a Suffolk poll, consider him racist. Last March, according to a YouGov survey, 71% of Democrats agreed that his campaign contained fascist undertones. Which leads to the question posed in the September issue of Atlantic. If you believe the President of the United States is leading a racist, fascist movement that threatens the rights, if not the lives, of vulnerable minorities, how far are you willing to go to stop it? For the radical left Antifa movement, the answer is direct action. They pressure venues to deny those they deem to be white supremacists space to meet. They pressure employers to fire them, landlords to evict them. And when people they deem racist and fascist manage to assemble, Antifa partisans try to break up their gatherings, including by use of force. This realization fuels the fear of the Trump supporters who suspect that the liberal bastions are refusing to protect their rights to free speech. Trump supporters and white nationalists see Antifa attacks as an assault on their right to freely assemble, which they in turn violently seek to reassert. This results in a level of sustained political street warfare not seen in the United States since the 1960s. Both of these movements came together again horribly in Charlottesville, Virginia, on August 12th, when a group described as white nationalists protesting the removal of a statue of a Confederate General Robert E. Lee were opposed by an Antifa group. The violent clash culminated when a self-described neo-Nazi drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. Elbridge. There's several themes in this story, one of which is whether there's a growing divide between the races in America. Is there?
There's been a growing divide for the last 8 years. When you elect a black president, there were those in this country that decided that race mattered more than the competency of the president. That's number one. Number two, the protest movement against white nationalists in Charlottesville was more than Antifa. It was the progressive movement, the civil rights movement, and others that were saying, no, we cannot have supremacists, Nazis. Grandfathers and grandmothers would turn over in their graves if they saw Americans supporting the rights of white supremacists and Nazis. And let's remember, Robert E. Lee did not want a statue put to him. He says we are one country, and that Confederacy is a divide of our country.
Well, we'll mine the ground that you just laid. There are several questions as to why there was a growing divide the last 8 years, and what happened in Charlottesville. There was violence on both sides, and it was intolerable. So we've got to explore that.
Violence on both sides, we understand. And in fact, let us not say that I support the Antifa movement 110%. No, but they are reacting to Nazis. They are reacting to the Ku Klux Klan. They're reacting to white supremacists who by nature have no good for any minority or a lot of this country. Don't be Catholic and don't be Jewish.
When the Nazis wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois, the ACLU supported their right of free speech and their right to protest. The question is whether violent counter-protest is the answer. Phil, as the nation attempted to regain its bearings after the deaths in Charlottesville, President Trump's rather inarticulate responses seem to increase the tensions. So do you consider President Trump a racist?
Of course not. Now, first of all, as you know, I was and continue to be one of the president's strongest supporters, so I certainly don't consider him to be a racist. But I want to go back to something in your opening monologue and something that we've talked about in general is we've called these violent protests. Let's call it really what it is. These are riots. And that's a notable difference because a riot is a group of people that are looking to do the wrong thing, they're looking to cause damage and otherwise. And to redirect a little bit, Elbridge, I want to ask you a question. What is wrong with neo-Nazis protesting? What is wrong with them believing something other than what the vast majority of us believe?
Now wait, let me
finish though.
We got to do this fast.
And hate speech is not constitutionally protected speech.
We have a limited
Correct.
amount of time, so we'll go back to Elbridge. I want to get to Liz.
So
now that this cycle of violence that we all have witnessed has started, where is it going to end up?
Well, it ends with all of us. I think a lot of people have realized that the media is manipulating a lot of vulnerable people. I personally do believe that it's a wag the dog situation. That red van that was placed right in that intersection was there for 20 minutes prior to the man driving in, so a lot of people think it was a setup. In reference to the Lee statues, et cetera, the Democratic Party in the 20s, 30s, and 40s put up all these statues to, to talk about how wonderful their ancestors were. And also, we just don't realize that our history is very diverse, especially in this region. There are a lot of people who are descendants of both sides, especially in a place like Maryland. And so when we have people who don't know your own history, people are able to manipulate. And let's not forget, Terry McAuliffe is BFFs with the Clintons. If you wanted to pick a state to screw around, Virginia is the #1 prime target.
But I want to go to Rich. Rich, you were talking about hate speech a minute ago.
Right.
And whether or not hate speech is protected.
And it is not.
Well, that's an issue that the courts have to decide.
I think
but
they
but
already
don't
have.
don't the people who want to, as Phil mentioned, who have antipatical views of Democrats, aren't they allowed to meet?
Of course they are, but you're conflating two things, Casey, and I'm with Elbridge. You can't lump the counter-protesters that were there in Charlottesville into this tiny faction called
Can you
Antifa.
lump every person there as a white supremacist?
I'm sorry, but if you're marching with people shouting, Jews will not replace us, you are a racist.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, you're
you
an
can try to duck.
anti-Semite, you're not a racist.
Well, okay. Explain to me
Well,
why
you're-
that's an important
Rich,
distinction.
But in language matters.
But the violence
it does
hasn't-
matter, but
the
can
violence
I
hasn't-
answer?
The violence hasn't occurred just against
Casey,
white supremacists.
let me just comment on your setup to this whole thing seemed to put all of the onus on the tiny faction of people called Antifa for the violence. Let's not forget, Antifa didn't kill anyone in Charlottesville. The Nazis did. Okay?
Well,
let me
Rich,
I
finish.
wanna
The
respond
Nazis
to-
came
we're gonna respond
armed
to
for
that.
bear and
So-
ready for violence just as much as the Antifa. And the left doesn't excuse Antifa's
they all got
violence
off the
any
same
more
bus.
than mainstream
They all got off
Republicans.
the same
Rich,
bus.
excuse
Rich,
Antifa.
Antifa,
Yes, it
Antifa
is.
College students in that
Antifa
crowd.
is
They
a
had-
group
no.
that started radical and violent protests.
Oh, excuse me. I
All
think
the
the
way
Ku
back
Klux
from
Klan started some
Cleveland.
radical
Oh,
and
and then
violent
those are
protests.
Democrats,
If I know my
Those
history.
are-
This
those
No,
are
they are
Democrats.
not. Not this day and
Ku Klux
age.
Klan-
Wait,
you
wait,
want-
Rich,
you want to bring it back?
Rich, let me
bring it
let me
back.
ask you a
Hold on.
question.
Folks, can I
In this
can I at least
anti-Trump
finish a
cycle-
You
sentence?
can't just pick and choose what you. If you
Can
want to
I-
say a small
Liz,
percentage of
let me-
Antifa,
Liz.
then the small percentage of neo-Nazis. It's the same small percentage
Well,
that
no,
everybody's
neo-Nazis by
placing.
nature. Neo-Nazis by
You know,
nature
all the
are-
folk
are-
on the
are violent
focus.
folks.
Exactly.
When you
Neo-Nazis by
but-
nature
by
are
nature
guess
violent.
what? So
Neo-
you're
Neo-
Neo-Nazis.
So,
Okay.
Elbridge, please
Right.
explain how are they not by nature violent folks? If they're out there,
By their creed.
let's
Their
hold
creed.
on.
No, no,
but
let me
they
explain.
also-
by
Let me
their
explain.
creed, which are
Their
words on a
creed-
page.
Can't get a
Their
word out of
creed,
that one.
their creed has for the destruction of black people, of
Jews.
Catholics, of Jews.
Gays
I've
and
come against the Klan.
homosexuals.
Right. And
I
so,
know.
did
I've
they-
had people that got lynched by the Klan.
Did they have a
No.
Did they have
Their
a
creed.
permit to
Ladies and
to,
gentlemen, we are
protest?
wrapping
They
this
had
up.
a they had a permit.
We're wrapping this up. This is a wonderful demonstration of how divided we all are. We see things through different prisms, and there are multiple layers between the group of each group and the people who are participating in these activities. We got one more topic before we go to break, and that is an important Maryland topic. The Department of Justice announced that it will not pursue charges against the police officers in the Freddie Gray case. Now, considering that none were convicted of crimes in Maryland courts, was this a fair decision or one of institutional racism? Phil.
Fair decision. 3 of the 6 officers are black. How can that be institutional racism?
Elbridge.
I'm conflicted, again, because there were blacks involved, but in fact, the victim really was denied certain constitutional rights. And that the Justice Department doesn't want to step in and maybe not convict, but at least help support some guidelines for how you handle people that are in your charge. That's a problem.
Okay, but the fact is they were tried and prosecuted in Maryland courts, and none were found guilty.
A conviction is not always the answer, but you still need to have justice.
Okay, Rich.
I'm with Elbridge. I don't think justice was done in this case, but it wasn't the Department of Justice decision because of the point that Phil makes. I think trying to show this as institutional racism wasn't able to be proven. I think what was clearly proven by what I know of this case was extraordinary acts of brutality in this case that should have been, you know, I don't know what went wrong with the prosecution of the officers at the state level. That's where that should have been resolved. I don't think justice was revealed, but I'm not convinced it was institutional racism simply because several of the officers were actually African American too.
The only point
It's hard to argue
I
they're
would
racist
make
against
is
their own people.
there wasn't just one trial. There were multiple trials.
I know.
So the prosecution.
I don't know whether it's corruption,
the
ineptitude, just bad evidence.
The prosecution had multiple opportunities to improve their case.
It's shameful if you know the facts in this case. This man was shackled and left in a truck that repeatedly sped up and stopped intentionally, it seems, to anyone reading the news reports, with the intent of harming this person, and he died as a result. The fact that there was no charges, I think, is a miscarriage
There were
of justice.
charges. There was no.
The fact there were no convictions, rather. Yeah.
Liz, wrap it up.
I think it's the issue of West Baltimore. I think we're talking about 40 years of failed democratic policies that have really gutted the community from any self-worth and self-value. When you have young men specifically between the ages of 14 and 35 who feel like as if they don't have a voice, they don't have self-autonomy, and they have an issue with authority. And also, there is a blue code of silence. I think a lot of these complex issues that we really need to address beyond the Freddie Gray case.
Well, Freddie Gray was a tragedy that this gentleman had died for what his offense may have been. When we come back from this short break, new report questions how good a job MCPS does preparing students for careers, and did President Trump just throw his supporters under the DACA bus? Stay tuned. And welcome back. Last week we reported on the recognition that 5 Montgomery County high schools received as being top rated in the state. This week, however, there's another report that casts doubt on how effectively MCPS schools have been in preparing students for life after school. Elbridge, the report indicates that MCPS is too focused on getting kids into college at the expense of other career choices. Should there be a re-emphasis on the so-called blue-collar careers?
There needs to be balance. I think MCPS has been responding or reacting to the parent demands and pressures without looking at the whole society. I'm an HGTV advocate, the construction shows, and we see that there is basically jobs that are going unanswered. I think there's $6 or $7 million jobs in the construction industry across the country, and we're not preparing our youth, to be skilled in that area. These aren't the old type of jobs. You need to know reading. You need to know math. You need to have certain skills that proper high school education will give you the foundation for. Once you get that, then you need to be able to divest and move into those other areas. The system needs to catch up with the realities of society.
It's interesting. I was with a client of mine who is a roofer, and his family has a 100-year-old business here in Montgomery County. He said that in order to get educated to take over after his father, he had to go back to college, get educated in construction management and how to read blueprints. So these technical jobs are not as meaningless or interesting as one would think. There's a lot of responsibility and technical knowledge involved in some of the trade skills. Liz, Is this a realization that too many graduate from college with a non-technical degree end up working as a barista?
Well, I'm actually a graduate of the class of 2002, so we graduated right after September 11th. So I would argue for the last 17 years, our economy has been shot. Even when I graduated from law school, a lot of my colleagues are still doing doc review. So I think especially in this region, we're super saturated and oversaturated with amazing talent. But you had mentioned, Elbridge, it's like reading, writing, arithmetic. I mean, those are basic skills that everybody absolutely should know after high school. Why is that? Why do people still have issues with the basics? And we do have to diversify our economy, and that's the issue, and it has been this whole time.
Rich.
Getting back to the point about what the schools are preparing our kids for, I think Elbridge and Liz both hit the nail on the head. We've got a balance of skills that are needed in our workforce. We're not preparing people for jobs that pay really well. Those construction jobs, they're not minimum wage jobs. These people have skills and they make a good living. And I think it's time that the county started looking at more vocational centers than just one and opening up more career paths.
I actually was very pleased to see the article. I thought it was long overdue that the focus be strictly on getting kids into college, because there are great paying skills outside of just going to college. All right, next and last topic, and this will be sure to please the audience. When President Trump announced that he was ending the Obama-inspired Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program, but suspended the effective date for 6 months to allow Congress to pass legislation. That's a dream, isn't it? Many thought it was a brilliant strategy to appease his base by ending what was considered an unconstitutional program and force the Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, to work together for a solution. But then came the contradictory tweets that suggested that the dealmaker-in-chief had been snookered by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the other Democratic officials. Phil Bell, once again, we're going to you because of your love for President Trump. Did President Trump betray his base?
Well, as President Trump's base, I can say no. A lot of people have called into the various talk shows like Rush Limbaugh and so forth and said, well, what do you think? And they said, well, we're fine with that. Number one, after I heard about this, the first thing I did is I went to the president's Twitter account and I said, well, what did he say about it? And it's funny. He didn't say anything. It's no surprise that Chuck and Nancy, I'm sure they sat down, had a wonderful dinner, talked about these issues like any group would, and then they said, look, we can run out of here, say we have a deal, see if we can push them into it. And of course they didn't, and it didn't succeed. And so we're waiting to see what the Congress comes up with to handle this.
All right, that may be fair. But what about the fact that President Trump has delinked the building of the wall with passage of DACA?
Well, he had never explicitly linked building the wall with passage of DACA in the first place. Now, were it up to me, were it President Bell, we wouldn't have DACA and we would have the wall, but the president said explicitly, we will have the wall. And I believe him until he disappoints, in which he hasn't so far.
All right. Rich, has the president thrown off his Republican facade and embraced his liberal Democratic past?
Well, yes 1 minute and no the next, and it all depends on which contradictory spokesman who weighed in after the Twitter storm broke, which had conflicting explanations and opposite conclusions to that question. So I think he's muddied the waters in a classic Trumpian way. I think Congress is probably going to sit down at some point and realize they've got to deal with this DACA situation. Just simply deporting some of these children who were brought here by their parents in most cases with no recollection of their countries.
We know the sob story.
It's more than a sob story.
We know the
it's more than a sob
sympathy
story.
play, and we know the media spin
But Casey,
that's been done about DACA.
Can I finish?
Yeah, you can
Okay.
finish.
The point is, 71% of Americans actually support DACA. That is not going to get lost on the Republican caucus. I think you're going to see a deal come together. I think it's not going to include a wall, but it's going to include border security and some other things that make everybody a little bit less unhappy. But I think we might have grounds for a deal here, despite everyone's best efforts.
Do you really want to go to me?
Yes, I
Okay.
do. Because are you like Brother Phil here,
Yeah.
thinking that the president is just using this as a strategic move, and you're not disappointed?
No, honestly, it was an unconstitutional move by President Obama, and it's an unresolved issue since the 1990s. So I personally think that people scoff about how, Trump goes one way and the other. If anything, he's more of an independent and a moderate like most of the country. And that these issues should have been addressed when these children were 5 years old and now they're 25.
But let's talk about what he's done with the DACA program, extending it for 6 months.
And pushing it back to Congress.
Right.
Balance of powers. That's the system that we have.
All right, Elbridge.
DACA is loved by most of the country, big business.
For cheap labor.
Right.
It's not just cheap labor. These folks contribute
Most people have
mightily to
degrees.
our economy.
Yeah. So
and they get little in return.
and the thousands
And
of
they
people
pay
who are
taxes.
out of the economy that are
It's
native born
been
in
proven.
West
There was a
Baltimore.
study that came out today. I
they're
wish I
useless,
had it
aren't
today.
they?
There was a study that came out today that it was proven the fact that poor blacks and poor whites are not losing jobs
Right.
to the DACA children.
Absolutely,
They are
they
not.
are.
To the DACA
Right.
children.
No,
They
there's
may
no
be
basis.
losing
Oh, they,
Are
oh, they're,
they
to the
not?
other
No,
illegals,
to
to
the-
the other illegals, their
we're
parents
talking
who are
about DACA.
who are
We're not
waiting.
competing.
No,
They're
we're
doing
They
that.
absolutely
They're
are.
DACA.
You guys, if
We're
you
talking about
actually,
DACA.
if your wonderful party, the Democratic Party, actually spent their time to research the impact
do.
on poor people
Wait a minute.
that you say that
This
you
whole
care
poor people
that our
about,
party
you
actually
ignore.
represents.
You
This whole
absolutely
effort
ignore.
started under
You
Ronald
literally,
Reagan.
you
This whole
literally,
effort started under
right.
Ronald
But
Reagan.
guess what?
And in
Clinton
effect-
tripled down, and that's the reason why Hillary did not win, because all of us, including black
Oh,
people,
don't go why Hillary didn't win,
especially,
because my name is not Russia.
I understand,
okay?
but guess
Yeah,
what?
let's
I didn't go-
Oh
let's-
my
my name is
goodness
not
gracious.
You had to
I
go
went
there.
there.
You had
Oh,
to go there.
but it is the
Please
DNC
explain.
that totally
Listen.
written
Immigration
off Bernie
reform.
Sanders.
Immigration reform is
Dem
is
exit,
going
Bernie was
nowhere
wrong, that's all
because
I've gotta say.
Republicans are controlling Congress.
Because the Democratic
That's-
Party is
that
the
is the
most
reality.
corrupt
Rich,
system
what is your
ever
idea of
invented.
immigration reform? Let's start with that. What
Well,
is your
first of
idea
all-
of immigration reform?
First of all, we need to focus on bringing people here who have the skills that our workforce needs that can add something to our economy.
Hey,
And
we
you
don't
don't care
no,
about
we
the
don't
people
let
who-
Why
enough.
don't you
no,
help-
You don't care
no,
about
that's not
American
true.
citizens.
There
Why don't-
are
Just
6
admit
million,
it.
6 million
You
jobs.
do
7
not
million
6 or
jobs.
7
care
million jobs
about
that
native
no
born
one
No.
can
Americans.
find.
You know what?
Or
I
stop
can
interrupting.
give you,
immigrants.
Rich,
You
I
know,
can
you
give you a
need
great
to
stop
example.
interrupting.
Oh,
Rich,
am
I
I
can
bothering
give
you?
you-
Is it making?
Rich,
Are you
I
getting
can't
get a
upset
word
right
in.
now? Are
It's
you getting
lousy
upset
TV.
right now?
Rich,
Liz,
I can give you a great
Liz,
example of this.
Rich,
The-
Phil,
You just can.
we're going to break.
Thank you.
We haven't solved it, but we had fun talking about it. Stay tuned for Party Shots. And welcome back. Now with Party Shots, Rich Parsons.
I want to give a shout out this week to my friends in Rotary across Maryland. I was fortunate to go to a meeting they held this week with their entire leadership in the state because they've decided to make one of their key focus areas opioid addiction. Now, this is a sickness and a real threat to our community that's taken over 60,000 lives here, 600,000 lives here in America, and 2,000 lives were lost last year here in Maryland from opioid addiction. It's time we really put a lot more resources into getting the treatment beds in place, the detox beds, which simply aren't there. We're not responding to this crisis in our community the way we should, and it's impacting us even here in Montgomery County. So shout out to Rotary for calling attention to this failure that we
Thank
need
you,
to
Rich.
address.
Phil Bell, your Party Shot.
I want to give a virtual high five to Frank Giaccio, 11 years old, from Falls Church, Virginia. He wrote President Trump a letter and said he wanted to mow the lawn at the White House. And so the president saw this and responded and said, you know what, you can come mow the lawn. So he bought his lawn mower, his goggles, and everything else and cut the lawn. And the president came out and welcomed him, took him into the Oval Office. It was wonderful to see, and congratulations to him for sticking with it and doing a great job.
Thank you, Phil. Liz.
I want to give a shout out to the people who are working with FEMA, Homeland Security, the police officers, and all of the devastation through Houston and now Florida. You are doing a yeoman's job right now, and we're sending our positivity and our love to all the people who have been devastated by these hurricanes.
Thank you, Liz. Elbridge James.
In that vein, let us not forget the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and a lot of the independent Caribbean countries who are our neighbors, our family, and our friends. They need help, and we need to reach out to them.
Well, those are great sentiments. I recall that 14 years ago that Katrina hit and devastated New Orleans and parts of Alabama and Mississippi, and our hearts go out to the people in Texas and in Florida. I want to thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank the panel for engaging in lively and controversial discussions. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show for 21 this week. I'm Casey Aiken.